Hello and welcome into Black and Blue on this Monday, November 11th, 2013. I am your host, Jesse Gettigan, and we have a lot to talk about on this chilly Monday here in La Crosse, Wisconsin. First, we want to tell you, though, if you want to get in touch with the show, if you want to say anything to us, really, the way to do that is BlackBlueRAQ on Twitter. Shoot us a tweet. We might even read it for the first time ever. Who knows? If it's good enough. Pressure's on you guys. What are we going to do today? What are we talking about? Obviously, it's a Monday show, so we are going to be recap heavy. We are going to talk a lot about that Bears-Lions game, which was a big game in the division this weekend. We've got a centerpiece for you on quarterback depth in the NFC North that I found really interesting. And as we try to do every Monday, we will get you some players of the week from the division this past week in the NFL. But first we start in Lambeau Field, where the Philadelphia Eagles came in and put up a 27-13 victory over the Green Bay Packers. And if you had told me when I started doing this 15 shows ago now, 15 shows already, that I would spend the amount of time I've spent now this week and last week on the Green Bay Packers starting quarterback position, I would have told you were insane. Or I would have told you something tragic happened, and it did. This week on the quarterback carousel in Green Bay, it was Scott Tolzien's turn. Scott Tolzien going 24 out of 39 for 280 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. And if you don't know who Scott Tolzien is, well, you probably just haven't been paying attention in this state, or you just don't have a very good memory. Scott Tolzien, who is he? He's a 2-year starter for the University of Wisconsin Badgers. He started for them in the 2009 and 2010 seasons. You may remember him starting the 2011 Rose Bowl for the Wisconsin Badgers against the TCU Horned Frogs. At Wisconsin, Tolzien was a pretty good quarterback. 2009, his first season as a starter at Wisconsin, he goes 211 of 328. That's good enough for 64%. 2,705 yards, 16 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. 2010 passes a lot less because, you've watched Wisconsin football before. They don't pass all that often. In 2010, 194 of 266, 73%. 2,459 yards, 16 touchdowns, 6 interceptions for Scott Tolzien. That was his 2 years as a starter for the Wisconsin Badgers. Tolzien would enter the NFL draft after that 2010-2011 year. He would go all the way through the draft and not hear his name called. The San Diego Chargers would eventually sign Scott Tolzien as an undrafted free agent. He would be released after that preseason of his first year there, claimed on waivers the very next day by the San Francisco 49ers in 2011. And Tolzien would remain with the 49ers until August 26th of this year when he was released. Signed to the Packers practice squad on September 1st, and yesterday pressed into action due to a Seneca Wallace groin injury. So what did we see out of Scott Tolzien yesterday? What do the Packers have going forward? Because we all know quarterback is the most important position in football. We all know it, and that's especially true in Green Bay, where so much of what they want to do on offense revolves around that quarterback position. So what does Scott Tolzien bring you? What's he capable of? As I mentioned, his numbers yesterday, 24 of 39, 280 yards, a touchdown, 2 interceptions. And there was a lot to like, even though he threw 2 interceptions. First and foremost to me was the arm strength that Scott Tolzien brought. He was able to hit those sideline throws. He missed the one on the interception in the end zone badly. But for the most part, he was able to get that ball outside with some zip on it, which gives the Packers a dimension that they're able to take advantage of at receiver that they wouldn't really have been able to use if Seneca Wallace had been playing. I saw someone on Twitter back on Monday night when Wallace got hurt. Or not Wallace, when Rodgers got hurt and Wallace came in. And it was such a great analogy. It was one of the baseball people I follow, someone who writes about the Brewers. And they said that the difference between Aaron Rodgers and Seneca Wallace at the time was like watching baseball when your ace gets hurt and in relief, they bring in an 86-mile-an-hour throwing veteran. and you look at the ball going to the plate and you go, wow, that is a lot slower than it used to be. That's the difference between Aaron Rodgers and Seneca Wallace, and it now is the difference between Scott Tolzien and Seneca Wallace. Tolzien's got a bit of a fireball. He can zip the ball in there, and it opens up some things for the Packers offense that they wouldn't have been able to do if Seneca Wallace had played that whole game. And I've seen enough now out of Scott Tolzien, and I've seen enough out of Seneca Wallace to say that Scott Tolzien is the man right now. He's the guy that gives them the best chance to win. He's got to be the quarterback of this football team going forward until Aaron Rodgers comes back. Now, that end zone interception, when they could least afford it, was bad. That was a very bad throw from Scott Tolzien. That throw has got to be outside. It's got to be on the sideline. As was mentioned on the broadcast by Troy Aikman, he throws it behind the receiver, which is the only place you cannot throw that route. You can miss it high and it'll go for an incompletion. You can miss it outside and it'll go for an incompletion. You cannot miss behind, or the guy that was beaten on the play will have a chance to recover and make the play that he did. So, some things to work on for Tolzien, but he came in just like Wallace did last week. He came in not expecting to play, not having the week of prep work as the starter, and he looked infinitely better than Seneca Wallace did in that situation. The Packers with Tolzien at the helm right now, I think he gives them a chance to be in games. I don't know that they win a whole lot of games with him playing quarterback, but he gives them a chance to be in him and have a shot at the end. Now, they didn't yesterday because the defense didn't live up to their end of the bargain. But Tolzien looks like he's going to be able to do enough offensively to keep the Packers afloat while Aaron Rodgers heals his collarbone, however long that takes. And it didn't look like, coming out of Mike McCarthy's press conference today, that there was a timetable yet for Aaron Rodgers. I believe the closest he got, I think he was saying that Rodgers was a couple weeks away, which could mean a lot of things. And still doesn't really tell us if he's going to play in what looks like it's going to be a huge game against the Detroit Lions on Thanksgiving. Of course, Seneca Wallace leaving with a groin injury, and McCarthy saying today in his presser that he felt Wallace could have come back in an emergency. Still no word on the severity of the injury, if Wallace is going to miss time with it. And if Wallace misses time with Aaron Rodgers out, that leaves Scott Tolzien as the only healthy quarterback on this roster, which means the Packers are going to have to go out and get someone. And that means that Matt Flynn visited Green Bay today. You can see the picture out there, Matt Flynn dressed in Packers garb after his workout for the Green Bay Packers today. No word on the signing. McCarthy in his press conference, quote, "Matt Flynn is here, looks good, worked out. That's it for now." So we will keep tabs all week on Matt Flynn watch, and we will hopefully have something for you on Friday if Matt Flynn is a Green Bay Packer or if they're going to pass on that opportunity. Who really knows right now? I mean, to me, it seems like an obvious call. Do I want Matt Flynn or do I want Seneca Wallace? I know what Matt Flynn can do in this offense. I've seen it. I still don't know what Seneca Wallace can do, and he hasn't done enough to prove to me that he deserves the benefit of the doubt. So if I'm choosing between Flynn and Wallace, it's not really much of a decision to me, but I've got a Matt Flynn-sized blind spot in this because that man is the greatest quarterback who's ever lived. Scott Tolzien, after the game ended and McCarthy did his post-game presser, which is different from the one I keep referencing today, which was just done maybe an hour ago. In the post-game presser, McCarthy did name Scott Tolzien the starting quarterback for the New York Giants game already. And I found that interesting in that I think it's obviously I think it's the right call. I think Scott Tolzien deserves that shot, and I think he will get that shot, and he will play pretty decent football with that shot. But I found it interesting that McCarthy already named him the starter, just avoiding the controversy. Unless there wasn't going to be controversy. I think he knows more about the Seneca Wallace injury than he's letting on. And I think he knows, he thinks to himself, okay, I'm not going to rule Wallace out yet. I'm going to give Tolzien the job right now, even though Wallace I don't think is going to play next Sunday. But it gives the appearance to him that I'm picking him over Wallace to give him a little more confidence, when in reality, I don't think Wallace is going to be healthy enough to play on Sunday. And I think later in the week he's going to rule Wallace out, and we'll see what they do for a backup. It almost has to be Flynn at that point. Who knows? That's just speculation on my part. But it's a really interesting situation with the Green Bay Packers at quarterback with the guys they have in right now. And if they bring Matt Flynn into the fold, I don't... obviously I think Matt Flynn is going to back up Tolzien, I would think, until Tolzien proves he can't play. Because Flynn, there's rumors of arm injuries out there for Flynn. There's, he's got to relearn some of the terminology in the offense, I would think. They've got to get him reintegrated a bit. He's got to work back to getting that chemistry with the receivers. He left before guys like Jared Boykin were here. He left before guys like Eddie Lacy were here. So he's going to have to work to get some of that chemistry going. So it's going to be Scott Tolzien for a while, and I would imagine until either he loses the job or Aaron Rodgers comes back. But the leash, I would think, at least with the fans, with Matt Flynn, if he is sitting there watching, the leash from the fans' point of view, it's going to be short because they're going to be clamoring for Matt Flynn because, I've already joked a couple times about how much I like the guy, but it's he's pretty universally beloved in this fan base for whatever reason, which isn't great for Scott Tolzien because, as I mentioned, that's just going to mean if the second he throws an interception, people are going to want Matt Flynn trotting out there for the next series. Elsewhere in this game, a game where not a lot was happening for the Packers on either side of the ball. Looking through the offensive statistics, Eddie Lacy, 24 carries, 73 yards. He did start hot. He looked good. He looked like Eddie Lacy early, but the Eagles eventually figured it out. They figured out how to stop him. Go ahead and make Scott Tolzien beat us, or at the time probably they were even thinking if Seneca Wallace comes back, we'll make him beat us. And eventually they put the clamps down on Lacy. Still a decent day for him. 24 carries, 73 yards, as I mentioned, which is the low bar I use for decent days for a Green Bay Packers running back. I'm just used to that over the past few years. James Starks, after looking like a great compliment to Lacy the last few weeks, James Starks, 4 carries, 5 yards. Generally, they want you to get more than 1 yard a carry, which he did, I guess, technically. Just not a whole heck of a lot more than 1 yard. Jared Boykin played well yesterday, though. Boykin, 8 catches, 112 yards. And Boykin is really impressing me. James Jones has come back. Jordy Nelson's always been here. And Jared Boykin is still getting the football consistently and making catches and making plays. Boykin on the year, 23 catches, 362 yards, and a touchdown. And with Randall Cobb out, he's really stepped up. He's really stepped into that role and played as well as you can possibly have wanted Jared Boykin to play. And especially after that Baltimore Ravens game when Cobb went out and Boykin was all of a sudden thrust into this role. And he looked bad at the time. Boykin's recovered and he's played really well and he's earned his place in the rotation in this receiving core. And it'll be interesting to see with Randall Cobb coming back, I don't know, 4 weeks maybe, 3 or 4 weeks, maybe even 5. But whenever Cobb comes back, it'll be interesting to see how Boykin, if they can continue to find a way to keep it taking advantage of the matchups he gives them. Because the idea of the Packers offense putting out Nelson, Jones, Cobb, Boykin to me right now, if they're all healthy, as an opposing defense, that would be terrifying, wouldn't it? I mean, those are 4 receivers who on any given day can beat you. It's frustrating to me when I do that with the Packers offense. When I think of it in what ifs and could be's, because the what ifs and could be's for this offense, if everything was healthy and clicking, this offense could be unreal, like unbelievably good, like historically good. Because the last few weeks, Eddie Lacy has really figured it out. He's really become a top NFL running back, I'd say right now. Not Adrian Peterson level and all that, honestly, but he's a guy you really like and a guy who's making plays for them. And that's the kind of compliment that Aaron Rodgers in the passing game has never had. So now how the heck do you stop that? I don't know. But no one's healthy anymore, so it becomes much easier to stop. Tweet coming in as we have a bit of news breaking during the show. Cheesehead TV, which is a Packers site on the internet. You can go visit. Packers, a lot of good Packers news and insight there. Cheesehead TV reporting that the Packers are reportedly working out quarterback John Skelton. You might remember John Skelton starting some games for the Arizona Cardinals. And I don't know if I'm choosing between John Skelton or Matt Flynn. Like, I can't even say John Skelton's name without sounding sarcastic. If I'm choosing between John Skelton or Matt Flynn, there's not really much of a decision there for me. Unless Flynn's elbow is just wrecked beyond anything I could have imagined. But when you're choosing between a guy who was as thoroughly average in Arizona as John Skelton and a guy who knows the offense and a guy who's performed in this offense, there's not really much of a decision to me. It does speak to sort of what I was speculating on with Seneca Wallace, that, Wallace must be hurt enough to be in danger of missing this next game if they're bringing in Flynn and Skelton today to do for tryouts. Because, why else do that if Seneca Wallace is going to play? Because obviously you're going to roll with the guy on your roster already if you have an option. But if they don't have an option, and if they have to bring in another quarterback because Seneca Wallace is going to miss the game on Sunday, then maybe that's what they're doing. Or maybe they're just going to cut Seneca Wallace. I don't know. I mean, I certainly think that's an option here. I certainly think it's possible for them to just go, you know what, Seneca Wallace isn't good enough. Scott Tolzien is. Let's bring in someone else. Yeah, and we'll get to this in the quarterback depth segment I have a little bit later, but if you're going to have a third guy like Seneca Wallace, he's essentially a waste of a roster spot in my mind. With Flynn, you've got a guy coming in who would be a guy you could count on you would think, if the game ever fell to him. Who knows? I don't know. It's really hard to predict this Packers quarterback situation right now. Here's what I do know. Scott Tolzien is the starter. He played well. He'll start on Sunday against the New York Giants. That's what I do know. The rest of it, who's going to back him up? What's going to happen to Seneca Wallace? All of that I can only speculate on. If I had to guess, I don't know. I feel like the Packers as an organization have wanted to move on from Matt Flynn all year, and he just keeps coming back to him. If I had to guess, Seneca Wallace is backing up Scott Tolzien on Sunday. I don't know why. It's just a hunch. I don't think the organization wants to re-sign Matt Flynn for some reason. I don't know the reason. It just doesn't feel like they want to bring him back. I know they had him in for a workout today, but that might just be a courtesy. That might be a curiosity thing. Who knows? If I had to guess, Seneca Wallace would be the backup, and they're going to hope to God that he doesn't play. And what's weird about this Packers team is, after Monday night, after the Aaron Rodgers injury, after the whole world melted down, all you heard was, how can the Packers win with without a quarterback? Who's going to play quarterback for the Green Bay Packers? Oh my God, what has happened? The quarterback isn't the problem anymore. Tolzien, there was that interception in the end zone yesterday. He threw another one that got deflected and caught or whatever. But he looked all right yesterday. Tolzien was fine yesterday. That offense was moving the football well. he was fine. You'd like more points. 396 yards total yesterday. You'd like a lot more than 13 points when you put up nearly 400 yards. And a lot of missed opportunities yesterday, and that's a big thing for this team. You get the end zone interception, the Jordy Nelson the Jordy Nelson reviewed touchdown. James Jones misses a sideline catch he should make not 10 times out of 10 for a touchdown. Mason Crosby misses 2 field goals. A lot of missed opportunities yesterday, and it just never felt like the Packers were going to be able to get over the hump and start really rolling enough on offense to score enough to make this a game. Crosby, of course, 2 of 4 yesterday. He had missed twice all year coming in. Not really a concern to me. It looked windy as heck in Lambeau Field, and he missed one from over 50, which every kicker does every now and then, even the good ones. So, chin up, Mason Crosby. I still believe in you. But as I was alluding to before, when I was saying how it seemed like, the quarterback gets hurt, the whole world's melting down, and then that's not even the problem anymore. The defense. This is the second consecutive really stinker of a performance from this defense. And it's when they can't afford to do this. A.J. Hawk said it yesterday after the game. Something to the effect of, the offense has bailed us out so many times before. Now it's our turn, and we haven't been able to do it. Something to that effect, A.J. Hawk said. And he's right. Because the last 2 weeks, when the Packers have needed this defense to play like it's capable of more than they ever have, they haven't done it. This defense has gotten burned the last couple of weeks. Nick Foles on the day, 12 of 18, 228, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. I mean, those aren't gaudy numbers, but they're good enough on this day when you combine it with LaShawn McCoy rushing for over 150 yards. And it's the boneheaded plays from this Packers defense that really infuriate you. Deshaun Jackson gets a really lucky bounce because Tramon Williams and I believe it was Morgan Burnett can't decide which one of them wants to catch the ball. It bounces off both of them and lands right in Deshaun Jackson's lap for an easy touchdown. Later in the game, Foles just chucks up a heave deep for Riley Cooper. And if M.D. Jennings has any awareness at all of where the ball is, he's able to easily knock it down or intercept it. Instead, it ends up a touchdown to Riley Cooper. I mean, it's just these mental errors and these boneheaded plays that had been so uncharacteristic of the Packers earlier in this season. I don't know. It's frustrating because when Aaron Rodgers got hurt, you looked at that defense and went, they've been better this year, a lot better than they have been, and they can be good enough to keep the Packers in most games. And they haven't been the last 2 weeks. And of course, the last couple weeks, and this is what really has Mike McCarthy in a sour mood, both post-game yesterday and today. It's those end-of-the-game drives. Chicago up a touchdown last week up however many they were up last week with the football in the fourth quarter. They go down the field methodically. They run 9 minutes off the clock in the fourth quarter, closing out that football game. The Eagles did the same thing yesterday. Ran up 2 touchdowns. They get the ball back. The Packers need to get it back soon in any way possible to have any shot. Tolzien's rolling a little bit. You get the ball back, you get a touchdown, get the onside kick, you never know. And the Eagles go and they get the ball back and they run it, 11 times on that drive, run over half the quarter off the clock, and close this game out. It's frustrating from a fan's point of view, and I've got to imagine from a player's and coach's point of view, to watch a defense that was such a bright spot for this team that you looked at and went, that's what's improved about this team, along with the running game. That's why this team can do things this year that maybe they weren't equipped to do the last couple of years. And now you're watching it all fall apart at a time when they could not possibly have needed to hold together more, they can't afford to have the defense play the way it has the last 2 weeks. And if the defense keeps playing like this, the Packers are going to be watching football from their couches in January. As I mentioned, LaShawn McCoy, 25 carries, 155 yards. Nick Foles, 8 carries, 38 yards. The Eagles run for over 200 yards on the day against a rush defense that up to that point had been very good. Riley Cooper, 3 catches, 102 yards and 2 touchdowns. Deshaun Jackson, 4 catches, 80 yards and a touchdown. Not a ton of pressure on Nick Foles on this day. Dayton Jones, by the way, Dayton Jones, welcome to 2013. If you can start playing him up to your draft position, it's going to be important. Dayton Jones yesterday, 2 sacks. Half a sack each for Tramon Williams and Mike Daniels. But outside of those 3 sacks, not a ton going on for Nick Foles whenever he passed. And not a ton of resistance in the running game either. As I mentioned, they go over 200 yards. And a number of people came back yesterday. Nick Perry played a little bit. But the big focal point, the guy who returned and the guy who a lot of the attention was paid to yesterday as he returned to that lineup, was Clay Matthews with his giant club of a hand. And the more I watched that game, the more I watched him kept at bay, and the more I watched the Eagles just shredding this Packers defense, I don't know. I just don't think Clay Matthews should have been out there yesterday. It's a nice morale boost the week after you lose your starting quarterback to get your leader on defense back, I suppose. But once he's out there and he's playing as poorly as he played yesterday, you got to make the switch. You got to realize, okay, he's not healthy, or maybe he is healthy, barely, but he just doesn't know how to play with this thing on his arm. Something was wrong with Clay Matthews yesterday. I don't know if it was health or if it was the giant thing on his arm. But he should not have been playing football yesterday, and he was a detriment to the Green Bay Packers. I don't know if putting someone else in that position for a team that's thin at linebacker as it is, I don't know if that would have improved their fortunes against the run, if they would have gotten more pressure on Foles. I don't know the answer to any of those questions, but I do know that Clay Matthews, in his current state yesterday, was a complete non-factor for this football team. And in my mind, his presence out there hurt this defense, which is such a weird thing to say because when you say, okay, we're getting Clay Matthews back, that sounds like an unequivocally good thing. I don't think it was good yesterday. I think it was a bad thing for this defense. And I think if these coaches watch the film and if they look at Clay Matthews' performance yesterday, they're going to think to themselves, okay, maybe we should put him back on the sidelines a little bit until he's ready. Maybe even until he can play without that giant club. Because right now, he's a shell of himself and he's not helping. He's hurting. And he shouldn't be out there. Overall thoughts from this one, it was a weird game, wasn't it? I mean, it was weird going in. The idea that I was going to sit down at noon on a Sunday and watch a Seneca Wallace-led Packers team, that was weird to me. And even weirder was him getting hurt, and then I was watching a Scott Tolzien-led Packers team. And as weird as it was, and there's a lot of stuff that you could really dwell on and feel bad about coming out of this game if you're a Packers fan. As I mentioned, the defense yesterday as a unit did not do their job at all. But there's some things coming out of this game that if you're a Packers fan and you're thinking to yourself, can we just keep it afloat enough to get in? And then once we get in, who knows what happens? There's some things you can come out of this game feeling good about. And it starts at quarterback. Scott Tolzien is the guy. He's the guy to keep this ship afloat until Aaron Rodgers returns. And what's really going to be exciting to me, and I was dreading this game on Sunday because I knew what was waiting for me at quarterback. I was dreading watching this game on Sunday. I'm excited for this Giants game because I'm excited to see what Scott Tolzien can do with a week of prep as starter in practice, to see what he can, if he can even take a leap from where he was on Sunday and be even better. Because if he's even better, he's going to be an asset to this team. And they're going to be, not Aaron Rodgers good, obviously, but they're still going to be a tough team to deal with. And that's what's really interesting to me about Tolzien. And it's what's exciting to me as a Packers fan, is that they might have found their guy to fill in for Rodgers here, thanks to the Seneca Wallace injury. Can they beat a suddenly hot Giants team on Sunday in New York? I don't know. Probably not. I don't know who I'm picking in that game yet, but probably not. But I don't think they're going to get killed. And I don't think they're going to get killed at any point in this stretch. Because I think Tolzien is good enough, and now he'll have that prep work. He's good enough to keep this offense looking somewhat like a semblance of what it used to be. Obviously, Rodgers is gone. He's going to be gone for a few weeks yet. And that's a dark thing if you're the Packers. But if what Tolzien is what we saw on Sunday, and that's a big if, but if Scott Tolzien is what we saw on Sunday, and if he could take that next step, then they have bigger problems than quarterback. Quarterback suddenly isn't even a concern for them because the defense is the problem. Just a lot of what ifs right now surrounding this Packers team, and there's an endless amount of storylines involved. They're just a really, and I say this, I'm a fan of the team, so I'm obviously a little biased in saying this, but they're just a really interesting team right now because there's so much going on there between the injuries, the quarterback situation, the defense, the return of Clay Matthews. There's just storylines pouring out of this Packers team from every crack. It's for some bad reasons and for some good reasons, it's a really fascinating story what's going on in Green Bay right now. But they aren't the only team in this division. There are 3 more, and 2 of them played each other on Sunday. And the Detroit Lions picking up a big victory. Detroit going into Chicago with a 21-19 victory over the Chicago Bears. Of course, the big story going into this one was the return of the Bears starting quarterback Jay Cutler. And Cutler on the day was Cutler, 21 out of 40, 250 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. He would leave late in the game, and word coming out today that Cutler left with a high ankle sprain, and he will be out this Sunday, according to Adam Schefter, for their game against the Baltimore Ravens. We welcome you to the NFC North, where only the Detroit Lions get to play with their starting quarterback. Josh McCown stepped in relief and did Josh McCown things. 6 out of 9, 62 yards and a touchdown. I mean, they were fine with him before. They were fine with McCown. They went into Lambeau and beat the Aaron Rodgers-less Packers. The Ravens are all right. They're not as good as they were last year. They're an okay football team. But there's no reason for me to think that with Cutler out, that that McCown's not going to be able to step in again and be as effective as he was on Monday night. McCown is everything you'd want in a backup quarterback right now. He can come in on a moment's notice, or he can start with a week's prep work, and he just gives you a chance, and that's all you really ask for. That's what the Packers, I would think, hope they have in Scott Tolzien right now. But the big story coming out of this game is the Detroit Lions. The Lions moved to 6-3 on the year, first place all alone in the NFC North. The Detroit Lions, and they're healthy. There is a good chance that all 3 other teams in the division next week will start a backup quarterback. The Detroit Lions are largely healthy, and that is a huge thing going down the stretch as we try to figure out who is going to really take the stranglehold of this division and win it. And you look at the health, and you look at the way they're playing, you look at the teams around them and the way they're scuffling with backups everywhere. The Detroit Lions are the clear favorite in the NFC North right now. As I mentioned, they're healthy. They've beaten the Bears twice now, so they have essentially a 2-game lead over the Bears. And their schedule is not that tough. And we've covered this in the past, but we'll run through it again quickly. This coming weekend, they go to Pittsburgh, then Tampa Bay, Green Bay on Thanksgiving, at Philadelphia, Baltimore, New York Giants, at Minnesota Vikings. This is a really interesting schedule to me, and it got more interesting the closer I looked at it here today, because these are all, every single one of them, especially if Aaron Rodgers doesn't play for the Packers on Thanksgiving, every game on this schedule is winnable. But what's really interesting to me about it is they are also very losable games if you lose focus going into one of them. Pittsburgh is still Pittsburgh. They've still got Ben Roethlisberger. They are still capable of beating you. Tampa Bay, maybe not. Green Bay might get Rodgers back, but even if they don't, if Tolzien is what he was on Sunday and he can cut the interceptions out a little bit, they are still capable of beating you. Philadelphia, with Nick Foles, who's red hot right now, they are very capable of beating the Detroit Lions. Baltimore is still Baltimore. They're capable of beating Detroit. The Giants look like they're ready to go on a run. They're capable of winning. And who knows what you'll have in Minnesota at the end of the year. So you look at the schedule and you go, it's pretty easy record-wise right now, and it is. But these are all teams that if Detroit is not laser-focused down the stretch, if they are not singularly focused on their goal, these are all teams that are capable of beating them any week. So when you look at the stretch run as we go into it here in the NFL, and you start to think about what are the stories as we go through the end of the season that are interesting, the Detroit Lions and their run towards the division title are up there because the road is clear and open for them right now. But there's stumbling blocks if they create them. Moving back to Sunday's game and some offensive stats for the Detroit Lions. Matthew Stafford on the day, 18 out of 35, 219 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. Reggie Bush, and we mentioned on Friday. On Friday, we mentioned that Reggie Bush would play a big role in this game because the Bears had been giving up running yards like it was going out of style since Henry Melton left. They've been, they gave up over 200 last week to Eddie Lacy and James Starks. So we knew the Lions running game would play a role coming into this game, a big role, and we knew they would try to run the football on this Bears team. As I mentioned, Bush 14 carries, 105 yards. Joique Bell 10 carries, 41 yards. So about 146 yards on 24 carries. Perfectly effective, perfectly in tune with what this team needs on a week-in, week-out basis to complement what they want to do passing the football. And passing the football was okay yesterday. As I mentioned, 219 yards out of Stafford. 6 catches, 83 yards for 2 touchdowns for Megatron yesterday. The running game got loose a little bit, but this Bears defense did a better job than I thought they would do at stifling this Lions offense. They did a better job at keeping them off the scoreboard, first of all, and limiting their yardage. 146 yards out of the running game isn't great, but you hold Stafford, who's plenty capable of going for 400 on any given day. You hold him to 219. He does find the end zone 3 times, but you feel like you've done your job. You hold Megatron out of under 100 yards. Again, you feel like you've done your job. Speaking of doing your job, the Lions defense yesterday, I think, really did a nice job. And they did it mostly against the running game of the Bears. Matt Forte, One of the best running backs in the league, a guy who can beat you on any given day. Forte, 17 carries, 33 yards yesterday. On a day where Cutler was only playing okay football, he gets hurt, McCown comes in. But it's a day where you'd really like to have that compliment. You'd really like to have Matt Forte to lean on and open some things up for Jay Cutler and Josh McCown. They didn't really get that. 17 carries, 33 yards for Matt Forte. Good job by the Lions defense there. A couple of wide receivers did get loose for Chicago yesterday in big ways. Brandon Marshall yesterday, 7 catches, 139 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Alshon Jeffrey, 9 catches, 114 yards. Now, what I find interesting about this is not the giant numbers those two put up, but because those two put up the numbers they did, you would figure to yourself that the Lions didn't have a great day defending the pass. 2 guys got loose for over 100 yards on 16 catches and a couple touchdowns. You would think the Lions didn't provide a whole lot of resistance yesterday against the pass. But when you look at the whole story, they were okay yesterday against the pass and good enough as it turned out in the end. Marshall goes for 139. Jeffrey goes for 114. But then we go down the stat line and we see everyone after that. We see that the Lions appeared content with that. Appeared content with letting Marshall and Jeffrey get theirs, while just making sure that no one else did. Because the next person on the stat line after those two is Martellus Bennett with 4 catches for 29 yards. Matt Forte, 4 catches, 16 yards. Earl Bennett, 2 catches, 10 yards. Someone named Flametta, 1 catch, 4 yards. So Marshall and Jeffrey got theirs, but nobody else on the Bears got anything. And it all adds up to a pretty decent day out of this Detroit Lions defense on a day where they hold the Bears to 19 points and were really just, good enough on this day to win this football game. And of course, they did win this football game. 40 seconds left. Josh McCown leads his team down for the touchdown, going in for the 2-point conversion to tie it. And the Lions do get the big stop to seal this win. Big win for the Detroit Lions. As I mentioned, the defense gives up 338 yards total on the day to the Bears. 300 of that is through the air. 38 is rushing. Always when I have a game with Cutler and Stafford involved, you want to take a look at the turnovers, see if anyone had an advantage in that. You remember Cutler turned it over, I believe, 5 times in the Detroit Lions win their first game. Both teams in this one, though, efficient with the football. Each only had 1 turnover, an interception from both Stafford and Cutler. You just never know when you go into a game with these two at quarterback what you're going to get turnover-wise. You could get a brilliant game, or you could get what I mentioned with Cutler, a 5-turnover game. You never know. But overall thoughts from this one, just a great win for the Detroit Lions. They take control of this division. It's all there for the Detroit Lions right now. It's all there looking at them. The ability to take this division, it's right there for them. The saying goes, they control their own destiny. It's absolutely true right now. The Detroit Lions, we sit here on November 11th, are in complete and total control of the NFC North and are the clear favorites to win it. But all the pressure is on them now. And as I mentioned, going back to their schedule going forward, every game is winnable, but every game is also losable, except for maybe the Tampa Bay one. So there's a lot of pressure on this Lions team to not do what a Lions team might have done in the past in this situation. They need to go out. They need to keep winning games because they should win most of these games. And they need to keep Chicago and Green Bay at bay. We'll see how they respond because this is a fairly unprecedented position for the Detroit Lions. We'll see how they respond now as NFC North frontrunners in this division. We move on now to our centerpiece of the day. We are going to look at quarterback depth in this division. And it's a really interesting topic, I think, now, Because as I mentioned earlier, the Detroit Lions might be the only team this weekend to start their starting quarterback. Which is a startling fact if you really think about it. That the NFC North right now is that banged up that only one team will start the quarterback that they would like to start this weekend. So we're going to go through. We're going to go through each team. We're going to look at their depth chart. We're going to look at what they have. We're going to hand out some grades. How are they at each position, and how are they at that position overall? How set are they? We're going to take into account everything. The starting quarterback will shift grades a lot, but we're going to take into account the whole situation right now and try and figure out who has the best overall situation at the quarterback position right now in this division. We'll start in Green Bay because their quarterback situation right now is probably the most high profile of any of the teams in this division. Going down their depth chart, obviously quarterback number 1 is Aaron Rodgers. He is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. He is, you name 3 quarterbacks in the NFL that you would like. He is in that 3. He might even be the first one. So he's obviously out hurt with the collarbone right now. Mike McCarthy saying no timetable yet, but it looked like it would be a couple weeks yet. But when healthy, Aaron Rodgers is arguably the best quarterback in the NFL. You can argue it. Peyton Manning's obviously still a guy. But at that quarterback 1 position, the Packers have a guy who you could argue might be the best in the NFL. So when you grade that position, you've got to grade that an A+. There's no other grade for what Aaron Rodgers is at that quarterback 1 position. But it's when you go down further in their depth chart that it gets a little more interesting. I'm going to go ahead and bump Scott Tolzien up to quarterback 2 right now. So he is their backup quarterback to me at the moment. Scott Tolzien's career statistics: 24 of 39, 61.5%, 280 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. You might remember those statistics because we talked about it, because those are his statistics from Sunday. That's the only game Scott Tolzien has ever played in the NFL, but he looked good. So what do you grade him? How do you grade Scott Tolzien as a backup quarterback in the NFL? I don't know. A lot of his story is going to be told this Sunday against the New York Giants when he gets a week of prep and you get to see what he could be in a prolonged relief situation. But who really knows what you have in Scott Tolzien right now? He looked pretty good on Sunday, but who knows? And that's a problem, I think, when you have a backup quarterback. The fact that you don't know what you have is a problem. So grading that quarterback position, or backup quarterback position, I like Scott Tolzien. I like what he brings to this offense. I think he's a preferable option to Seneca Wallace, but I don't know definitively what he is at the moment. So I can't go any higher with my grade on that backup quarterback position than a D+. Because I think you have to know in the NFL what you have in the backup quarterback position, and the Packers don't. Down the depth chart even further, quarterback number 3 is Seneca Wallace. Seneca Wallace, on his career, is 468 of 788. That's good enough for 59.4%. 4,947 yards, 31 touchdowns, 19 interceptions. Seneca Wallace in this 3rd quarterback position makes no sense. He's old. He doesn't seem to be any good. He's a waste of a roster spot right now. Because if I have a football team and I'm picking my guys to be quarterback 1, I obviously want the best possible guy I can get. That's obvious. Quarterback 2, I want a veteran. I want to know what I have if he has to come in and play. Quarterback 3, I want a young guy with some potential that I can groom to be that quarterback 2 someday. Seneca Wallace is old. He is not going to improve anymore. He's a waste of a roster spot right now. If they bring in Matt Flynn could potentially improve a little bit. He could potentially be the quarterback too. He could be an asset for this franchise. He's a better guy to have in that spot. Even John Skelton, if that's the guy in the third spot, he's still a little bit young. He could still improve. He could still grow into that quarterback 2 spot. They're both preferable options. I look at Seneca Wallace right now, and I've said it a couple of times. I think he's a waste of a roster spot at this point. I don't think he has a role here. I have to give them an F for that roster, or for that spot, for that third quarterback spot. So overall, taking stock of the whole unit of quarterback, what do I have if I'm the Green Bay Packers? I have to give the whole unit, all 3 quarterbacks, a B+. Because Aaron Rodgers is so good. He's one of the best in the NFL, if not the best. But the backup situation is so murky, so unproven, and in the case of Wallace, so wasteful of a roster spot that it drags that grade all the way down to a B+ from what Rodgers would normally carry a group to. Moving on in the division, the Detroit Lions, their quarterback 1 is obviously Matthew Stafford. Stafford is a franchise guy. He's a guy you build around. He's a bit turnover prone. And I think those turnovers keep Matthew Stafford from being that sort of highest echelon quarterback, from being talked about in top 5 quarterback conversations. But when Matthew Stafford is on, few quarterbacks in this league are better than Matthew Stafford. At that position, I'm going to give the Detroit Lions an A-. But it's the next position where they make up some hay, because Shaun Hill is a perfect backup quarterback. Shaun Hill on his career is 591 of 954, 61.9%, 6,381 yards, 41 touchdowns, 23 interceptions. He's played games for this Detroit Lions team. He has proven he can win with this Detroit Lions team. He is the perfect guy to have as a backup quarterback. And that's why when you're grading backup quarterbacks, which is what I'm doing right now, you've got to grade a guy like Shaun Hill high. So Stafford gets his A-, and I'm giving Shaun Hill as a backup quarterback, grading a backup quarterback, and giving Shaun Hill also an A-, because I think he fits that role about as perfectly as you can find a guy to fit that role. Quarterback 3 is Kellen Moore. You might remember him from Boise State all those years. One of the winningest, if not the winningest, quarterbacks in college football history. And Kellen Moore's career stats are blank. Kellen Moore has never taken a snap in an NFL regular season football game. And that makes him tough to grade, but I do applaud them a little bit for doing what I want, or what I said I'd like to, or I like teams to do with that third quarterback spot. Keeping Kellen Moore around as a potential guy, as a guy you don't want to let get away. How do you grade Kellen Moore? I have no idea. I don't know what Kellen Moore is. I'm not going to sit here and claim I watch Lions preseason football, so I don't know what Kellen Moore is. Blind shot in the dark grade, I'll give him a D because he's potential, because he's a guy to keep around for that reason. Largely, he doesn't factor in a whole lot to my overall grade for this unit, which is an A-, which is actually better, I think, which is actually better than what I gave the Packers situation, which is interesting, because if I'm taking any quarterback in this division, obviously I'm taking Aaron Rodgers. But the Lions are so much better equipped if their guy goes down. So much better equipped with Shaun Hill than the Packers are with either of their options, that it makes up for it. And I think as a group, the Lions grade out a bit higher. Moving on to Chicago, Jay Cutler is obviously the first guy there. Cutler is the best quarterback this franchise has had in many years. When he's great, he's great. He's not quite, when Jay Cutler is really good, he's not on the level of when Matt Stafford is really good, because I think they're very similar quarterbacks in that they're both turnover prone, but they both can be explosive. But Cutler isn't, when he does explode, he doesn't explode on the level that Stafford does. And he seems even more prone to the big turnover game that Stafford has in him every now and then, but Cutler seems to have him in him with more regularity. So as a starting quarterback, Cutler is good some days, bad some days. I'll give Jay Cutler a B as a starting quarterback. Backup, my backup quarterback grade for them is clouded a little bit by just how good Josh McCown has been lately for them. Because his career stats are not very good. 687 of 1183, that's 58.1%. 7,536 yards, 41 touchdowns, 44 interceptions. Those aren't very good stats, but he's been good lately. So I don't know which Josh McCown is the real Josh McCown. If I'm giving a guy like Sean Hill, who is dependable, reliable, can win games for you, if I'm giving him about as good a grade as I can give a backup quarterback, McCown can't be on that level, but he seems to be, like, if you were looking through the league and drafting backup quarterbacks, McCown would go early. So I'm giving Josh McCown a B as well right now as the backup quarterback. Jordan Palmer is their third string quarterback, which I had no idea Jordan Palmer was a Chicago Bear. Jordan Palmer's career statistics, 10 out of 15, 66.7%, 59 yards, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Obviously not a guy you'd want playing ever, but I applaud that. Much like there's not a big sample size there with Palmer, so you don't really know what you have in him. So I kind of applaud them in the same way I applaud Detroit for keeping Kellen Moore around, because I think it's the perfect use of that third quarterback position. Just keeping a potential guy around, a guy who can grow into the role a little bit. So I'm going to have to give Jordan Palmer the same grade I gave Kellen Moore, which was a D. Which is fine. Which is okay. You can't give a guy that you literally have no idea what you have, you can't give him a high grade. But if you keep him around for potential, I'll give you a passing grade, because I think it's at least a decent use of that third quarterback position. Overall, throwing out Palmer's grade a little bit, give the Bears a B at that quarterback position. They're pretty good. Some days they're really good. Some days they're not as good. But on the whole, they're an okay bunch. Finishing up with the Minnesota Vikings and their quarterback position. And this one was interesting as I got to thinking about it more, because we'll start with quarterback 1, which is right now Christian Ponder. And on his career, he's 573 of 953, 60.1%, 6,034 yards, 36 touchdowns, 32 interceptions. Christian Ponder's not very good. He has been lately, and he's going to get my Offensive Player of the Week award. So it's a little bit of a weird thing to say right now. But on the whole, for his career, Christian Ponder hasn't been very good. And he's looked like a replacement level NFL quarterback. So as a starting quarterback, I'm going to have to give Christian Ponder a D+, which he's actually earned his way up to with his play in the last few weeks. But what's interesting is the quarterback situation for the Vikings seems like such a mess. But when you break it down and you have to assign person 1, 2, and 3, Matt Castle as a second quarterback is a pretty darn good option. Castle on his career, 1,255 of 2,119, 59.2%, 14,031 yards, 85 touchdowns, 59% or 59 interceptions. That's experience. That's a guy who can win. That's a lot of the stuff you look for in a backup quarterback. Matt Castle, in a way, is a perfect backup quarterback. So give him an A for the backup quarterback, because that's about as good as you could do. At quarterback 3, Josh Freeman, 1,164 of 2020, 57.6%, 13,724 yards, 80 touchdowns, 67 interceptions. And still young and still a lot of potential. That's about as good as you can do for a third quarterback. So what seems like a mess ends up in me giving the Vikings about a C for quarterbacks, because their backup situation is about as good as you'd want in the NFL. They just don't have a starter, which is an issue. And we are going to have to relegate Players of the Week, it looks like, to Twitter. I want to thank you for sticking around. Thank you, as we're running a little bit long here. Next show on Friday, we will cover this weekend's games: Packers, Giants, Ravens, Bears, Lions, Steelers, Vikings, Seahawks. Just ask you to stay tuned to the station. I'm sure whatever's next is great. Have a good night, and we are out of here. Thanks for listening.